The purpose of this session is to clearly focus our collective attention on the challenges and the opportunities facing grassland farmers around the world as seen through their eyes. Now, for a range of logistical reasons, it was not possible, of course, to bring all of the farmers here in person, although we do have a couple here. So, hi Todd, hi John. Thank you. Couldn't bring all of the farmers here, but what we did was arrange for a number of our colleagues worldwide, and they're all here, thanks very much colleagues for doing that, to interview grassland farmers on their own farms in their own countries. So what this session is going to comprise are video presentations from those farmers, straight to you. Think about the challenges for research. What do we need to do as a global network of grassland researchers, farmers, other industry people? What are the things we should be focusing on to really help take grassland farming where it needs to go as its contribution to feeding our rapidly changing world?
I've been working in Western China with smallholder farmers, and we held a workshop with farmers, largely farmers, earlier this year to talk about our research findings and to get feedback from the farmers. And if I closed my eyes and just listened to the translation, I could have been sitting in a room full of Australian farmers. With exactly the same issues, the market fluctuations in prices, the high input costs, climate variability, access to new technology and having confidence in new technology.
What we have seen in Spain related to local ecological or traditional knowledge is that it is being lost, but only, we have compared 4 generations, and it is being lost only in the last generation, so in the people younger than 25 years, and only, which is most interesting, when this generation is displaced from the activity. The lack of continuity in the knowledge transmission that this other delegate was talking before is also happening within farmers.
As part of the response to the cost price squeeze, farms are getting bigger. So that 10,000 dairy farmers was 12,000 4 or 5 years ago, and it will probably be 8,000. And that creates a whole lot of issues. So a 1,000-cow farm has a lot of staff on low wages. And so how do we manage this change process? Are we preparing to provide the support services to that change type of farming that's happening with bigger farms? It affects several levels of interaction. It affects the way the farm system interacts with the marketing. It affects the sociology of the community at another level, schooling, the support for schools and things like that. So I see a need to prepare for bigger farms in a number of levels.
Farmers obtain their information from a lot of different sources nowadays, and I think we'd be amiss to not recognise that fact. So at least in the developed world, advisors, whether they be commercial, fee-for-service or whomever, are a pretty important link in that network that they source their information from. So I think we just need to think about who we treat as the audience for our communication as well.
We should not forget the role of globalization and modern ways of communication. As, for example, we can see in Germany, and the German agriculture very much likes technology and techniques. The farmers do not really say, or are not content with research, or are dependent on university and agricultural research in Germany. They tend to get their information from elsewhere in the world. So they're traveling a lot, they're using internet and various sources of information and build up their own skills and their own ideas. And what convinced them most is to see when a technology is working on farm.
I sort of seem to think that why farmers probably learn well from other farmers is because they've taken the theory and put it into practice, and they've taken a lot of the complexity out of things. I would actually like to say that funding bodies in Australia are really encouraging more and more involvement with producers in terms of producer groups, making sure that whatever is being developed is systems fit, as the jargon says. But we really do have to think about whatever we're doing, how can we make this, or how can we take the complexity out of it? Still achieve the same results, but just think about taking the complexity out.
Farmers require simplicity on the far side of complexity. I want to know that everything has been thoroughly researched, but presented then in a way where you can make an easier decision.
Another major challenge is what's happening in our research, teaching, and extension programs. In the U.S., over the last 25 years, we've lost about 60% of the forage livestock researchers. We've lost about 40% of the forage livestock teachers, and for extension, it's been even worse.
We do have to do more with less. It seems to me that working with groups gives us a way of, in fact, doing more with less.
We have the goal of improving the profitability of the cow-calf sector in Saskatchewan and Western Canada. That is our organizational goal. I think we have a model that works very well for integrating what producers want from research and linking them into the whole process of designing research ideas, soliciting their support for funding applications, soliciting their help and getting the information out. We use website, YouTube, all the technology that we can find to communicate with producers.
And I think we have the example of the land-grant colleges. I think the increase in agricultural productivity in the US was absolutely phenomenal in all of history. And that was based very much by the land-grant university researchers actually having direct contact with the farmers. Their research agendas were driven by the farmers' agenda, and that record stands everywhere. And in Africa, we've learned we have to do integrated agricultural research for development. All the stakeholders in the implementation of the research results must be part of that research. That is proving to be by far the most effective way of getting impact. And you can still publish.
Groups often feel that they need to reinvent everything for themselves, and so there is a tendency for there to be reinvention of wheels. And so there needs to be opportunities for information to be transferred from group to group to group to group, so that scarce research and extension funds can be used most wisely.
I've also been privileged to farm in a cooperative natured industry where our farmers have shared things, we've shared all information, competed. Our competition is not internally, it's externally. And doing that drives innovation faster than working as an individual. So as a cooperative, you're stronger as a collective than you are an individual. I believe the science industry or the R&D industry globally needs to become more cooperative and share more of the information that's done and make sure nothing's replicated. There is a number of papers put away in filing cabinets that are still relevant today, and in my research I've found numerous articles that are still beneficial. So we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel and utilise farmer-driven groups with different funding mechanisms.
Any scientific paper that was written probably more than 25 years or 30 years ago rarely gets reference now because it's not in the database, the citation index, etc. And so the point that was being made by some of the great work that was done, and really those principles are still as pertinent today, we're not, and it comes back to getting better communication, we're not tapping into it. We've got to make sure that we're tapping into that and not reinventing the wheel, etc.
I don't believe working with less for all industry participants is acceptable.
Seems to me that groups offer challenges and opportunities. The opportunity is that researchers can enter into partnerships with groups and achieve a much larger footprint than they otherwise would, because they can talk to a group of people who are only concerned about their issue, and that's fantastic. Some regions don't have groups, and therefore there are communities that perhaps may be impoverished in this kind of facilitation, and we do need to look at achieving a much better integration of communities that don't have groups. The second problem is that as government has recognised the value of groups, perhaps there's been some over investment in groups perhaps at the expense more of some of the more traditional agency-based work. And we do need to be sure that we're still maintaining the appropriate levels of investment in each of those areas.
We should link together the researcher, extension service, and the farmers. And that link is missing, especially if I'm talking about the developing countries, especially Pakistan.
Throughout my career, I've seen many examples of where good farmers have come up with the answers, then researchers have come in behind them and basically just confirmed what the farmers had already worked out. And often they've missed a key point that the farmers had also taken into account because they were building it into a system. But research can do things that the farmers can't actually do. And that often means we're fulfilling the role of going down to more basic type of studies to understand a mechanism from which you can then develop a practice. Don't think I've ever seen an experiment that exactly comes up with the perfect answer for a farm. It often just informs the discussion about what one can do and how you could do it, and the general territory within which you should be making your decisions or applying a technology. And so we contribute to the discussion as much as we contribute the data.
Farmers and researchers have different aims. Farmers want to increase their productivity, they want to maintain their farm business. They also want to meet the demands of the society, think of product quality issues, environmental points. Researchers look for research opportunities. They have to write papers. International competition has increased tremendously during the last 10, 15 years. Researchers are evaluated. Researchers spend a lot of time in writing papers and proposals and in supervising students. From a researcher's perspective, I must say I don't have time to talk to farmers, except on Saturdays and Sundays. So the question is, what is the solution? I think we should invest more into extension services.
I'd like to stress from an African point of view that it's extremely easy to abuse the small farmers. They're said to be very risk averse, but we've got so many examples of small farmers taking advice from extension workers and then being left to take the consequences. We really have to develop a system of accountability so the person giving the advice shares the risk. There's a culture in Africa that we need to change the extension office and de-link it from authority. There's such a long history of extension officers giving directives, giving regulations, giving quarantines and whatever, that we need to get a system whereby the extension officer becomes a partner with the farmers, not the authority. And I've been listening to the concept of having groups, and David mentioned it earlier, right on in Africa. We need to restore the authority of the local governance, the local farmers. And one way of doing that would be to do research with them, consult with them, advise them, let them carry the results to their communities and rebuild their authority so that they can give real advice. So we need to develop a way of true consultation.
Listen to those discussions that international group of farmers gave us on the video. And I think if we don't jot down a few of the points they mentioned, I think we're missing the boat. I took down 10 points, and I'll just quickly go through them. Animal health, nitrogen efficiency, genetics of pastures and livestock and pastures, water use efficiency and irrigation, methane emissions, phosphorus management and availability, weed control, mechanisation on steep lands, extension services, and management to improve the environment. I think that list should go up.
I would like to see a much greater emphasis in R&D on profitability. If there's one thing that I see that is in common with farmers all around the world, is they're not very profitable, often negative. They do have families to support, and I think we often forget this, even though it's so important. I think research has been taken over by environmental considerations, and the profitability thing has been second. And of course, we can't ignore the environment, but it should be in the context of a profitable business. Otherwise, we are in serious trouble in the future.
But I'm grateful for the list of 10 because they're applicable in Africa, obviously to the local situations. But I'm also very pleased about the point 11, which is profitability. So let's take those 10 and that last point as read.
One of the things that came through very strongly from your farming audience, and comes through strongly from our farming audience in New Zealand as well, is the sense of community and the sense of requiring all of our players to get together. So what I would like to do is to maybe revisit the byline for this conference, which was Revitalising Grassland to sustain our communities, and suggest to you that the biggest challenge to research is to revitalise our communities to sustain our grasslands.
We need a more subtle definition of subsidies. Subsidies given to American cotton farmers means the cotton is costing more than it's worth. But subsidies being given to Malawian maize growers was not subsidy, because the maize was still worth more than what had been spent, but government shared the risk of the fertilizer. So we need to find a way in which governments can start supporting smallholders without it being condemned universally as subsidy. We need to find credit systems which have low transaction costs so that innovations can be picked up.
Changing attitudes to decision making is often needed more than adoption of new technology, something we haven't mentioned. Farms are complex businesses. Adoption often isn't as a consequence of the actual agronomic result. It's for a different reason, but a combination of the two is required to get change.
I think underlying all of the issues that have been raised is just quite simply our need to improve our communication, really simply across all levels. And I think if we can achieve that, then a lot of these problems will become a lot easier to solve.
The grassland research industry, I believe, is in the most exciting point in time of any of the R&D areas in any research. The animal genetic research is outproducing grassland research. We're seeing animal genetics improve at a quantum rate compared with grasslands, and we need to see the next big leap. We're struggling, and I get challenged around New Zealand dairy farmers supplementary feeding cows now because they just cannot grow enough pastoral feed to feed them alone and become more efficient. So I think somebody needs to develop a strategy on how it gets there, who's responsible for it, and who's going to drive getting more funds to fund R&D to get there.
It can be done. We don't have to say it can't be done as researchers. We need to look for the opportunities and exploit them and say, let's move forward. Let's not get stuck in this rut of saying we haven't got enough resources, we haven't got enough people to do the work. Let's get going.
I believe it is a privilege to do research. It's also, I can assure you, a privilege to be a food producer.
We've been 2 hours on one topic, and with huge enthusiasm still from everyone on the last day of the conference. I think that emphasises how much value we put in trying to help the farmers of the world to deliver the food and the other products that we need to come from their farms, and also to ensure that they have livelihoods that are worthwhile and what they would hope for and expect. Thank you very much to all of you. That's the close of our session. Thank you very much indeed.